Yes, it is time for BBC Ask This. We've been asking you for your questions on Brexit throughout the day. And with me to guide me through, Dr. Ruth Fox from the Hansard Society, which provides independent research and advice on Parliament, and Joe Owen from the Institute for Government, both here to try and help to answer some of your questions. Now, Ruth, the first question: can a second referendum still be called? And this has been a debate going on in the Commons in the last few minutes. Can it?
Yeah, it's still a possibility. If the parties, nothing emerges out of their arrangements, so their discussions. If it's possible that the Labour Party offers a confirmatory referendum as part of a commitment to let the agreement go through. In terms of time, I mean, the experts on this at the Constitution Unit at UCL suggest it would take about 5.5 months to organise it properly. So we would be pushing it to do it before the October deadline. It would be very, very tight, and the MPs would have to be legislating for it almost as soon as they come back after the Easter recess. So it might be difficult to do it before the end of October, but it's still a political possibility on the table. The
Prime Minister making the point, in response to Vince Cable, that actually the government has already twice voted against one. So, yes. So what would the procedure be? Well, clearly the government doesn't want one, but there is a possibility that it's the only way to get the agreement through in terms of the next stages and to try and have an exit with a deal. In that basis, the government effectively would be reliant upon votes from the opposition. Clearly not a position that the Prime Minister wants to be in, but she's been in that position a couple of times already, so it wouldn't be unusual. Right. Joe, this one from David Ralph in Hertfordshire. If the UK does leave the EU, what are the rules about us eventually rejoining?
So we just have to go through the accession process like any other member state. We'd have to hope that we hadn't cheesed the 27 off too much and they actually still wanted us back. And then there are some big questions about how long it would take. So Turkey, has been waiting to join since 1987. So these negotiations won't necessarily happen particularly quickly. They could probably happen a lot quicker than that. But we'd also likely to lose a lot of the opt-outs, the special bits of the relationship that successive prime ministers, even this prime minister as Home Secretary, managed to negotiate. So there's no guarantees at all that we would come back in on the same terms that we leave on.
And of course the point, and we're hearing it shouted here, revoke Article 50. If we revoke Article 50, we return full members of the EU on exactly the same terms as we are on at the moment. Effectively, this never happened.
Exactly right. So if we revoke before we formally leave, so that's currently could be the 31st of October, if we revoke before that point, in terms of how everything legally, it all stays the same. It's all as it was. We've lost nothing. Nothing changes. I mean, the relationship with the 27 member states might be slightly different, though.
Worth making the point, if only I could. Do you know, when you get shouted at like that, it does completely throw you down. He's talking about revoking Article 50, and that's what I want to talk about. But it would be fair to assume that whatever rejoining deal we made would never be as good as what we got now. That's what people point out, those that are saying we should remain.
So we've, over a number of decades, have negotiated various things. So opt-out from the Schengen area, a budget rebate, there's different security opt-outs that Theresa May negotiated when she was Prime Minister that we actually fought pretty hard for inside the bloc. Now, if we came and said, we've changed our mind and we'd like to come back, the chances that the member states would then give us some of the leeway.
You probably meant Margaret Thatcher, did you? I don't know.
No, Theresa May is Home Secretary.
Oh, I see.
Negotiated,
but every Prime Minister has at various points done that, haven't they?
Exactly. So I don't think the EU27 will say, OK, we'll give you all of your special measures, come back in. I'm not sure it would be quite as easy as that, but it could be. Who knows?
Yeah. OK, well, let's move on. This one, probably best for you, Joe, again. As the Good Friday Agreement does not involve customs arrangements, why is a customs border without a security border not acceptable?
So the Good Friday Agreement didn't need to contain anything on customs arrangements. So the UK joined the EU at the same time as Ireland. We were member states in signing the Good Friday Agreement, and some of the negotiators, people involved in the Good Friday process, would say that actually the fact that the two were member states made things in certain areas much, much easier. So one of the big pillars in the Good Friday Agreement is about north-south cooperation, and this idea that's come up a bit in the Brexit negotiations about protecting the all-Ireland economy. If you were to introduce a customs border, I mean, one example is to certain farmers, you'd say you used to be able to sell your carrots down the road, but down the road is now across a customs border, so you need to start filling in all of these pieces of paperwork, paying tariffs as if you were trading with Canada. So it could be hugely disruptive for the economy and certain communities that live in the border area.
Right. Very quickly, don't go away either of you, because there's just getting some news coming in from Westminster Magistrates Court. It's about Julian Assange, as we were saying. He's been appearing at Westminster Magistrates Court, and we're just hearing he's pleaded not guilty to a charge at the court that he failed to surrender to custody as required for an extradition order to Sweden. So that's the latest coming in from the court. I'm just hearing also from Daniel Sanford, who's our correspondent, who's covering that case. And as part of that hearing at the court, they've been describing what happened at 10:15 this morning when police arrived at the court. Daniel is saying officers tried to introduce themselves, but he barged past them. He resisted and shouted, "This is unlawful." He had to be restrained, and officers struggled to handcuff him. He shouted again, "This is unlawful, I'm not leaving," as he was led to the police van. You may have seen the pictures that were taken as he left the Ecuadorian embassy and was bundled into that police van. Well, Daniel Sanford outlining what has been described in court about that moment at 10:15 this morning. So we're keeping an eye on developments there, but he's pleaded not guilty. That's the very latest coming from Westminster. Let's return to Brexit and to my guests, Ruth Fox from the Hansard Society and Joe Owen from the Institute for Government. Now, let's talk about passports. My passport, says this texter, expires in November. Am I okay to travel in Europe this summer without renewing it? Now, a lot of people worried about passports and travel.
The answer is should be fine. So if we...
That's not definitive.
No, it's not definitive. So the challenge here is if we stay in the EU until the 31st of October, or even pass a deal and enter into the transition period before then it's fine. It's not a problem. But if we fail to hold European Parliament elections, one of the kind of provisos on this extension was holding those European Parliament elections, or you crash out without a deal at the beginning of June. So if we were to crash out without a deal at the beginning of June, then you would need 6 months. That doesn't look likely, but it's still a possibility. But other than that, you're fine with your passport as it is.
Ruth, the process of European elections, how complicated is that going to be at this stage?
Well, the procedures are there. They can hold the elections. The local government is gearing up. The Electoral Commission is gearing up for them. I think the question is the sort of the political embarrassment that attaches to holding them, and the possibility we may be electing MEPs that barely sit in the European Parliament chamber for any length of time, if at all. I think that's the issue. And also, what is turnout going to be like? Turnout in European elections is always pretty awful, and I think, you know, it's going to be a hard task. We've got the local elections coming up in England at the beginning of May. Shortly, you know, a couple of weeks later, you've got European elections. What is the incentive for people to go out and vote? It might be that there's a reaction to this. There's a reaction to sort of the Brexit mess and the perception of the parties, which does drive turnout up a bit. But it could be that everybody just says, no, staying at home. And, you know, that will be pretty messy.
Yeah. OK, next question. What extra payments, this is probably for you, Joe, what extra payments did the EU demand from the UK in return for this extension to Halloween?
So the short answer is no extra payments. So we'll continue to be paying our net contribution as we are still a member state, and we will be receiving the benefits that we also we have as a member state. So I think our net contribution is around 12 billion a year. So that's about 6 billion for the extra 6 months. But remember, we would also be paying that if we entered into the transition period. That was part of the financial settlement that was agreed with the EU. And also there's a chance that large parts of that would have to be paid even if we left without a deal. So the short answer is we're paying nothing extra for this extra 6 months. The big thing is we're losing time in that transition period that was agreed for negotiating the future relationship. That is shrinking as we extend this period of our kind of Article 50
it's
period.
It's often forgotten that the process so far has only been about leaving. We have yet to even start looking at a future relationship.
It may not feel like it, but this is supposed to be the easy bit. Once we've formally left, there will be a huge number of issues that are up for negotiation. We've really been focusing on citizens' rights, the financial settlement, and the Irish border have been the big priorities. Then that balloons out once we've left to our future trading relationship, security relationship, covering goods and services and trade. So it will be much more complicated and also much more to do.
Now, Ruth, Brexiteers, the argument was the longer any extension, the bigger the fear that Brexit is lost. So we've got a final question for you. Is there a chance that Brexit will not happen?
There's a chance politically if the parties can't reach agreement and we can't get a deal. It's quite clear that the House of Commons does not want to leave the EU without a deal. But it's enormous political risks attached, and I think the political question would be would the government revoke Article 50 on its own initiative? There are legal debates about whether legislation is needed or not, and I think the question would be actually could any government realistically do it without putting it to a referendum first? So I would say it's still unlikely, but it's still possible. It's on the table as an option.
And despite what happened last night, the pressure is still on, isn't it? I mean, there is a sense of you can almost hear the sighs of relief with Easter coming up and the building behind maybe shutting for a few days. But there is still huge pressure to avoid spending the money for a start that would be involved in any Euro elections.
Yes, and but the difficulties of getting the deal through before the 22nd of May are pretty tight. They'll be back for a few weeks. If the political parties are not making much headway in their negotiations, then it's difficult to see how we avoid them. So yes, they don't want to spend the money, but the reality is they're probably having to spend it up front now anyway. And I think the pressure will be on, can we get this done before the 31st of October? I mean,
Trick or treating, yes.
Trick or treating.
All right, Ruth, very good to see you. That's Ruth Fox from the Hansard Society, Joe Owen from the Institute for Government. Thank you both very much. That's BBC Ask This today.